Today I'm joined by the legendary Mancunian Steve Diggle, the guitarist and now singer of Buzzcocks. Steve, thank you for coming in. How are you?
Nice to be here. I'm good, thanks. Just come off the road, but I'm going back on it again in a few weeks.
I was about to say, you've got a busy year ahead with Buzzcocks.
Busy year ahead all over the world, really, yeah.
Yeah, you've got
And world tours where this, they book it at the beginning of the year and it goes on forever. Never ending tour.
Well, what's it like being on tour after all these years later, playing these songs that were written 50 years ago?
Yeah, I mean, it's still good. I mean, we had a new album out 2 years ago, and the importance of that was like the keyword relevant. I wanted to keep relevant, and so it's always good to put a new album out, something fresh, as well as we've got a massive back catalogue. We had all like the hits in the '70s and the albums, the pivotal albums. So we do, I mean, it keeps going, and every night you're playing in a different place to different people. So even the older songs, you don't get tired of doing them because you kind of play them in a different way,
I was going to say, after all these years, do they take on a different energy or a different sort of manifest in a different way?
Yeah.
After the
each room's different and the people are different, so the vibe's different. In the Holy Church of Rock and Roll, it's just a different environment. So you kind of tend to play it differently, every night. So you're not really playing the same song every night, I don't think, in the same way, You're reacting in a different way to that situation.
Sure.
Plus the fact a lot of them are great songs and, a pleasure to do, They're not a problem. So
Sure.
It's good that way as well, yeah.
And people that come to Buzzcocks these days, are you seeing it sort of like as a spread of generations? You got the old punk rockers, and then you've got children, and then the influence that they've had on maybe up and coming 20-somethings that are into their indie music or their rock music.
Yeah, I mean, we get a lot of younger people coming. We've kind of always had them, but yeah, we like say we spent like 3 generations now, And even the new stuff, when they're singing that at the front, I think that's amazing, They wasn't born when we started, and they're singing like the last single that was out a couple of years ago or something, and and they get to learn about the other classic ones. So it's it's an ongoing thing, really. I think some people think like, oh, it's only people from that generation that we do get that followed us from the beginning, but you get all these other ones. But I would say this, they still do Shakespeare. And he's a lot older than us, so we're only just starting,
Well, obviously, the unfortunate death of Pete Shelley in 2018. How have you adapted since Pete's death, becoming the front man and sort of leading Buzzcocks as the front man?
Yeah, I mean, I was with Pete from the beginning, so we went through a lot together, and a lot of the songwriting, the travelling, the touring. It's a massive thing. It was like a brother in the band, really, and so it was a bit tragic. And it's actually 6 years ago now. I can't believe it's that long. And we was doing a show at the Albert Hall here in London, and went to. Didn't realise when we booked that was going to make it a memorial show for Pete, so that's what we did, We had a few guests on to make it some kind of celebration. And then after that, we had a few more shows booked, so we just kind of carried on. It was like, do we stop? And I'd put a few solo albums out, so the manager said, do you want to go solo or that? But we got these other shows to do. So we carried on doing that, and then it was like, well, we'll carry on the Buzzcocks then, So that's what we did. But I used to half front it anyway, really, because I was always kind of full on with the guitar. If he was singing, I was like full on.
You'd get the crowd going in a way, yeah.
While he was stood there singing. So there was I was kind of used to that. And I'd sing like about a third of the songs anyway, particularly certain songs I wrote that, pertain to me more, like Harmony in My Head and stuff like that. So it was just a matter of moving into the centre, but it's one of them things you kind of, you miss him, you can't bring him back, you kind of got to move on, and that's what we've done over the last 6 years. It's there's no way around that, So,
and when you,
but we still do, his songs in his memory as well and all that stuff. but it's got to be ongoing, so it's all good, you know.
It's all good. And when you're playing his songs, singing his songs, do you try and do it as your take on, you know, Buzzcocks songs, or do you try and sort of channel Pete?
Yeah, I mean, when I first started doing some of his songs, that was the songs he used to sing, I thought, I've got to get in a different key. I knew I could do that because on the first album I wrote this song called Autonomy, and I sang it in a high pitched voice, and I got Pete to do an answer to the line, and they were both at like his pitch really. So I changed after that. I went a bit more rockier. So I know how to get that range. So what I did is, like a fine whiskey, I blended his voice with mine to bring him in, and a couple of other things, you know. So for a time I made that kind of transition of I would sort of half his voice, half mine, and found a medium in between. Mm-hmm. And then you've got to make them your own in the end. So even like songs like Everybody's Happy Nowadays, which is very high, he wouldn't want to do that live sometimes. Even for him, it was starting to get a bit high, you know. Mm-hmm. So I've just been doing that one recently and some others. Why Can't I Touch It is another one that's really high. Fortunately, now, I've not sang that for weeks because the crowd sing the chorus. But I can get up there, but but I've blended that a little bit, and you find your way around, you know, and make it a new thing. And it's particularly with the new song I wrote, that, you know, I mean, wrote me in my key, but I still I've gone up a little notch or two to give it that Buzzcocks identity as well, you know.
Well, Buzzcocks, you're back out on the road with the Sex Pistols, obviously fronted by Frank Carter. How does it feel to be back out with them? They're in, you know, you're intertwined, your histories together.
Yeah, it's like things have come full circle, because we brought the Sex Pistols to Manchester in 1976, opened up for them, and we got reviewed in the press because, like, they thought, well, we started 2 days before the Clash. I think there was the Jam and the Damned and the Sex Pistols, and us that was the nucleus of punk rock, if you like, in 76. And so we opened up for them, got reviewed, and we was on the map, you know. And so it's kind of gone full circle. We're doing that show in Margate with them. It's like history repeat itself.
And Glasgow.
And Glasgow we're doing as well, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, that famous story of bringing the Sex Pistols to Manchester, I mean, it's sort of the foundation story of Buzzcocks. Could you just recall that story?
Well, I think it was Howard, and I think Pete as well. They were on a college trip to London and went in some little club, and there was this band, the Sex Pistols. Nobody had really heard of them, you know. And I think Howard said, if you want to put a poster up, we'll put a gig on for you. Then, you know, we'll sort that out. And so that's what he did. He booked the Lesser Free Trade Hall in Manchester, and on with the Sex Pistols. In the meantime, I'd phoned a guy at the paper, went to start a band, and they put an ad in a magazine, kind of like Time Out. And so I went to meet this guy outside the Free Trade Hall, and there was a guy all dressed in leather, like the Elvis Comeback Tour. And it was Malcolm McLaren, and he said, they're inside the Sex Pistols. I said, no, I'm forming my own band. I'm waiting to meet someone. He said, no, they're inside. And I thought, I don't know anything about this. So I walked in, and he introduced me to Pete, who was collecting tickets on the door. So we had a chat in the bar after, and I thought, I don't remember saying this on the phone. Certain things made sense, but others didn't. And then we watched the Sex Pistols. There's about 20 people there, but we sat at the back of rows of seats watching, and you know, was talking about doing this band, the Buzzcocks. And the person they were supposed to meet, the person I was supposed to meet, they're probably still outside the Free Trade Hall. Somebody better tell them it's not going to happen now.
Well, they say it was 20 people, but the story goes that those 20 people were some of the most influential musicians to come out of Manchester.
Well, yeah, there was all kinds of people there. I think, you know, there many of Joy Division and people like that. I'm sure when Mick Hucknall, Simply Red, there was all kinds of people there. And a lot of people said to us there that weren't there, you know. But then the key one, about 3 or 4 weeks later, they came back, and that's when after that first one, me, Howard, and Pete all plugged into a little amp like this and played Boredom Orgasm Addicts. And I said, I've got this song, Fast Cars, and all that. To quote Yeats, a terrible beauty was born. It sounded awful, but exciting,
Mm-hmm.
All three of us in a little amp. And so then we had about 3 or 4 weeks before the Pistols came back and opened up, and that was the start of the Buzzcocks then, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And what was the Buzzcocks' approach to making music? You said you all plugged into one amp. Did you have a sort of like constitution that you were going to stick by, or a manifesto for Buzzcocks?
Well, one of the manifestos was to make the most uncommercial music possible. It was kind of like, because we didn't know each other before that, it just seemed to fall into place somehow. It's like four misfits that got together. That kind of worked, There was some kind of understanding. I mean, there was every time I bought a single as a kid, I always bought a book. You'd buy like Dostoevsky's hits, Crime and Punishment, and buy The Who's My Generation or something. So there's a little bit of that existentialism thing going on, and a bit of art thing going on. So that was all around, and there was that kind of minimalist approach, particularly on Spiral Scratch. I mean, the other thing was, when we made our first demo, we thought, we can't take this to a record company. They'll probably laugh you out of the building. They wouldn't know what this is, and so we made our first record for £500. We made 1,000 singles. And that inspired so many people and bands to do that,
It was that DIY aesthetic, or do it yourself, just...
Yeah. I mean, it's seen as a stroke of genius, but it was also a stroke of necessity, It was like, well, let's just make 1,000 singles so we can hear what we sound like and send it to the gigs. As soon as we made that single, we got offers from 6 major record companies, The irony of it, it's... But that inspired so many people to go out and do that. So I think Buzzcocks, inspired a lot of people for that, as well as the music, because it was kind of a little bit different. We was different from the Sex Pistols and the Clash and stuff. I think we had a few more experimental things on our first album.
I'll say, you say you were a bit different to Sex Pistols. You had a sort of shared love of the sort of melody and the 60s melody, it sounds like. Bands like the Kinks, the Who, the Beatles, who weren't always fashionable bands within the punk scene. Did that differentiate you from Sex Pistols?
I think so, yeah. Well, I mean, they was the band that kicked the doors open, I mean, we could be just as aggressive, I mean, growing up with Who, watching Pete Townsend smash the guitars and, them all fighting on the stage more or less. I mean, I could relate to that as well, but the Pistols were the Pistols, like on the front line of it. And then the Clash were kind of political and exciting. And we sang about the human condition more, really, I think, But having said that, I mean, a lot of my songs were like slightly political, like Why She's a Girl from a Chainsaw and Autonomy on the first album. I remember Joe Strummer coming up and going, I love that song, Autonomy, Self-Rule, So we had it in a different way, and we had a lot of complexity about it. It wasn't like a conscious thing, but it seemed Buzzcocks were like a bit hard to work out somehow sometimes, But we had the songs and the tunes, and we did grow up with all the classic bands you mentioned, like the Kinks and, Beatles, Stones and all that. We was children of that time, And then also the Velvet Underground and stuff. And also we was into krautrock bands like Can and Neu and stuff like that. So we used to bring that into our music as well. When we first played in New York, the Ramones came to see us. And we got their first album before Spiral Scratch, so that kind of inspired us a bit. And the Ramones said, we love you guys. We're just straight ahead, but you take it to other little places, you've got these angular guitar things. So that was a great compliment, and they were kind of right, really. We'd take it to other places as well. Yeah.
So you had these ideas of what you wanted to do with Buzzcocks, and these influences were starting to filter in, as you said, from art and books and music. What was a day in the life like of being a Buzzcock in '77? You know, you were writing a lot.
Yeah.
You were moulding your sound in a slightly different way from other bands at the time.
Yeah.
Was it all conscious? Was it all like, we got to do this, we got to do that? Or was it just sort of hanging out?
Yeah, well, I mean, we never sat down and planned anything, you know. That would have been the danger. It was all natural and organic. It was who we are. I mean, like I was saying about the French existentialists, and you know, they'd sit outside bistros. We'd sit outside of pubs in Manchester and discuss the universe and, you know, philosophy and all kinds of silly things as well, you know. But there was a lot what Pete was and what I was, and there was a lot of things understood, but never like planned out really. If we talk, I mean, like the experimental thing. When I was 16, I went out and got drunk, had a big hangover, and my mother was vacuuming outside my bedroom door, so I recorded that and had this big sound system in my bedroom, played it back to her, trying to blast it out with 100 watts of a Hoover. And I thought, that's white noise. It sounds amazing. So some experimental ideas come from that. And, you know, I'd stuck out housing albums and stuff like that. As well as growing up with Motown and all that as well, you know, all the usual sort of people. But there was this kind of idiosyncratic thing about the Buzzcocks as well with it. We used our limitations well, you know. I mean, when I had a first bought guitar, it was like a £5 Spanish guitar. Every time I tuned it up and played a chord, it'd go out of tune. So I got tired of that, and one day I learned to play Beethoven's Ninth on one string. This is before I met the Buzzcocks, and I thought I could play Beethoven before the Beatles. And then I started doing little tunes, and I realised years later that having that cheap guitar, you know, and having to do little tunes on like 2 strings and stuff, they all featured and are peppered in a lot of the Buzzcocks songs, you know. If I'd have had a good guitar, I wouldn't have done that. I would have just gotten with the ordinary stuff. So in the face of adversity, that was the inspiration. Incidentally, the rich kids that came from Altrincham and stuff in the music shops, Daddy would buy them a new Les Paul, and I'd go like, how are you getting on with that Les Paul? And they'd go like, oh, I sold it for a pair of skis, you know. Well, you know, so you could do more on a £6 guitar than, you know.
Was it these limitations that led to punk in a way? Is that where it all stemmed from, was sort of getting music and getting sound out of what you had and what you were feeling at that time? Yeah.
I mean, I even built my own speaker cabinet, you know. My dad was a van driver. He nicked an amp off the back of the van and a bass guitar, guitar. But I had to build my own speaker. I know, but I thought even Christ had to carry his own cross, you know. I had to figure out how to build a speaker. I'd never built anything in my life, you know. I couldn't do it today. I don't know how I did it then, but it was all about necessity in those days, you know. But very inspiring all that, and very punk, really, you know.
Why did punk spring there and then?
I think, well, the landscape was barren, really. It was like, you had all the progressive bands, like Yes and stuff like that, who were all right, but it kind of run its course for a while. We was coming up to 20 years old, and you wanted like 3.5-minute songs and some excitement, you know. I started listening to The Who again, and Little Richard and stuff. I thought, in 3 minutes, they create this excitement and stuff. And also, I was a big Bob Dylan fan, you know. When I was young, the girl across the road had, my mate, his sister was 16. She had the first Beatles album and the first Bob Dylan album. And she had a hairdryer, which I'd never seen. She was drawing a long blonde hair with a miniskirt in the mirror, and I had the first Beatles album and the first Bob Dylan album. Now, I got the Beatles because of the tunes. I thought, I don't know what that guy's saying, and they still don't know what he's saying, I don't think. But that resonated with me, the Bob Dylan bit as well, you know, all that kind of stuff. So I think that was all in the mix for me. But it was the minimalist stuff and the instant stuff of it all, really. You know, we brought it back to them 3-minute songs. That meant kind of life or death, you know, the importance of when you're like 20 and stuff and you want some excitement, you know.
Do you think something like that could happen nowadays with access to all information, all music, all genres?
Well, yeah, there seems to be a lot more guitar bands coming about again. It's hard to define a lot of them, though. I think, like, you knew who the Pistols and the Clash were and stuff, and who the Jam and the Buzzcocks. They define themselves over the history, you know. And maybe these new ones will as well. I'm sure they will, you know. I mean, it's it all comes around again. It's just good to hear guitar music back again, you know, because, I mean, the dance music was great as well for a while, but then they lost the guitars until the 90s, you know. But somebody picking up a guitar and singing some words you can relate to, more than "Take me higher" and "I've got the power," you know. It's like you can listen to dance music in clubs, but it's that personal thing at home, you know.
Are there any groups, artists that you are a fan of that have sort of come up in the last few years?
Molotov sound exciting now. I saw them in a little pub in the Spice of Life a long time ago, but it's there. You can see they're inspired by that kind of thing, you know, those generation things. So, you know, I think they've just brought a single out. So, you know, I think they're just starting with it all. But they've got the excitement and the insight, and I think there'll be others about as well, you know.
Well, speaking of great bands, obviously you're from Manchester, and that area seems to keep producing amazing bands. Seem to sort of spring up from the drains. What is it about the area that produces great bands? Is it something in the water? Is it?
Yeah. I mean, I've been asked that so many times, and probably every Manchester band does. But it is amazing. I mean, Manchester's big, but it's not too many distractions. And I think when you've kind of got no money and there's no distractions, you start looking into yourself a bit, you know. You get an insight and a self-realisation. And it's also somehow that Manchester mentality that guides you through the music. I think we've all got it, you know, the Stone Roses, Oasis, that everybody seems to have, you know, you can tell they come from Manchester. I don't know how it happens, but there's some internal thing there where you kind of look into yourself. And I think all those bands like us start with no money, so you have to start thinking on your wits, you know. But it gives you a great beauty for rock and roll, really. And so if we started, like, a scene in 1976 with the punk days, after it became like, you know, the Smiths, who were quite influenced by the Buzzcocks, and, you know, I love them as well, and the Stone Roses, Happy Mondays, and Oasis, you know. There's a long line of tradition there, you know. It's but it's something magical about Manchester that, you know, I think it's the vibe and the insight somehow. And there might be something in the water there, you know. And maybe the water's dirtier than everyone else and it's poisoned our minds or something.
And fellow Manchester bands that came up at the similar time to you or just after, Joy Division, The Fall, you are more tied to the Pistols and the Clash rather than these other Manchester bands. Did you, at the time, did you feel like you were part of the Clash and the Sex Pistols, and then there was this other scene with Joy Division and the Fall up in Manchester, or did you sort of feel like you were jumping between the two?
Well, there was a crossover. I mean, we kind of started with the Pistols and the Clash and stuff, but then we took we had the Pole supported us for a lot of gigs. You know, we had a van and roadies and all this by this time, and so we'd take their gear for free and all thing, and we give them a load of gigs, you know, and same with Joy Division. We took them on the road. We were suddenly doing the theatres like, you know, Glasgow, Apollo, and Manchester, Hammersmith Odeon, and stuff like that, and we took them on the tour, you know. But by the end of the tour, Ian Curtis killed himself, so. But I think we give them a break there, and we inspired them, you know. In fact, if you hear their first album, it sounds a bit like our bootleg Time's Up, you know. But also, I mean, I wrote this song Autonomy on the first one. We had Fiction Romance, Moving Away from the Pulse Beat, and a song called Autonomy, which was quite experimental, going back to that sort of krautrock roots, you know. I must have been in a weird place when I was 20. I was pretending to be listening to Germans trying to sing English, you know. So I pretended to be an English bloke trying to be a German singing English. So I got to this song Autonomy, I going, I want you, autonomy, you know. And also I just went straight down the neck, the most unorthodox thing. I thought, I'll think out of the box. So that was a little bit experimental. Then I had this ascending riff. Now, when Johnny Marr he heard that, he said, he's on some video somewhere saying it. He went out and bought the Buzzcocks album and he said that riff was the new riff of Manchester, and that was the clarion call for. So that was quite experimental in its way, that song, because everybody was linear at that time. And there was another one, Moving Away from the Pulse Beat, Fiction Romance as well, on our first album. So I think like Joy Division and The Fall, you know, I mean, that sort of set the possibilities beyond the straight ahead punk rock stuff, you know, on that first Buzzcocks album. It was different from the first Clash album or the first Pistols album. We were doing that, you know.
And we mentioned before Oasis, they're reforming this year. Got to mention them. Another famous Manchester band. Are you excited to see them back?
Yeah. I saw them the first time around a few times, and I think I went to a few parties in those days, and I still see them around now, you know what I mean? And they made some good solo albums as well, but it's good that it's come full circle for the people that haven't seen them. And it'll be a great event, won't it? It'll be massive, you know. I mean, it's... You thought maybe the boat's gone too far out to sea, they won't come back, but obviously they're doing this kind of world tour now, which I'm sure everybody's happy to see, you know.
And they're fans of yours. Liam called Buzzcocks the second best band to come out of Manchester.
Yeah. It's good for from Manchester, I think. Yeah, he did. That was a great compliment. But I've kind of known them over the years and been to the gigs over the years, and like I say, it's that long tradition of Manchester bands, really, isn't it? But it will be a great event, this, you know. I mean, you see people are getting excited for it now, and it's way ahead of time, you know.
Can you hear your influence on them, maybe especially on their early records?
I think I bumped into Noel once, and he said, I've been listening to the Buzzcocks, one of our songs sound like that, you know. Because he might have borrowed something out of it, you know, as we all do, you know. Yeah, you know, they're aware of us and our songs, and I you know, love their songs as well. You know, it's a mutual thing. We was rock and roll in a different way, you know. We had that, like that off the wall thing, but it was still rock and roll. I mean, when the Buzzcocks were live, we're full on as well. But they had a more traditional approach. I think they took more traditional influences than we did, really.
Yeah.
We took some more weirder ones. But it's the same kind of... It was the attitude as well, you know.
I was going to ask, is the attitude, and the way they were able to sort of channel simplicity to a widespread audience as well. Like, the music is not saying simplistic. I'm saying they were able to channel it in a way that was instantly relatable. Yeah. Is that something that you could...
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, that's what we did as well in our way, you know. Made simple songs, but were catchy, and, you know, people could connect with them right away, you know. And that's what Oasis do as well, isn't it, you know. It's that simple... You know, Chekhov said simplicity is everything, you know. It's harder to be simple than, you know, to be all complicated and stuff, you know. And that's what they do well, you know. And the next time, but the other important thing is the attitude, you know. And it's a Manchester attitude, but, you know, punk had the attitude as well. It wasn't just the songs, it was about the attitude, you know, and that's what Oasis have got as well, haven't they, you know. It's all about... The attitude's just as important as the music, you know. Or it goes hand in hand, doesn't it?
And will you be going to see them on the upcoming tour, do you think?
I will be if I'm not in America. Yeah. I think I will be, yeah.
Any chance that you were going to get a call up, Liam, say, or you said you live nearby and shout over the fence? Steve, do you fancy playing a gig?
I'll probably see him in the pub sometime. He's a City fan, I'm United, but we get on okay, you know.
Yeah, do you get on personally?
Yeah.
You see each other?
So, you know, I mean, they love the having a go at United, and quite rightly sometimes. But they're getting in the same boat. But yeah, you know, I mean, I see him around for a drink or two in there. Yeah.
So you'll be seeing them in tour maybe a bit as well.
I'll probably see him in the pub after the gig. Hopefully. Who knows? But I will be seeing him around, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well,
and Noel as well. I'm always bumping into Noel in the street, you know.
Oh, really?
Well, we always kind of walking down the street somewhere and it's like, all right, you know. So it's like that. But if I'm not in America, I'll be there, you know.
Mm-hmm. Well, while Oasis were bursting onto the scene, you were also touring with another legendary band. You were touring with Nirvana. Did this come about because they were big fans of yours? Because I think Cobain said in the past that you've influenced them greatly.
That's right, yeah. And we had many deaths in the Buzzcocks. It took Ian Curtis on the tour, he died. Did a tour with Nirvana. Kurt shot himself, you know. I mean, there's a few... Mark Bolan loved Spyro Scratch, who was going to go on his television show, and he died the week before. There's a lot of deaths around. But with Nirvana, it was like when Teen Spirit was number one, and the album Nevermind, we were playing in Boston, and we had this tour called the Trade Test Transmission Tour, and we had all these old TVs. We used to get the rollers all up and down Britain and in Europe, getting these second-hand TVs, and we'd show a kind of arty and bit of porn film kind of thing. And I'd smash them up every night with the mic stand, you know, trying to be like The Move in about 1965 or something. Smashed 6 televisions behind me. And if you hit it wrong and hit the wrong component, you could go up in smoke, you know, get electric shock, which I nearly did one night. It's only the adrenaline got me off the stand. So I perfected the art of throwing them at the screen and they'd implode in the smoke. So I did that in Boston. Bang, bang, bang. I perfected the art and all the smoke came up. Got straight off the stage and the tour manager said, Nirvana here. And in walks Kurt and, you know, Dave and he said, Steve, I love the way you smash the televisions. So I told him a story about you've got to be careful. He said, I've only smashed one television. I said, you're not live, man. I've smashed thousands. I'll show you how to do it, you know. So that was our kind of first meeting with them. And you know, and Dave and Pat Smear and Chris. And so they said, when we come to Europe, will you know, do the gigs with us? So that's what we did. But and that was our last tour, you know. But yeah, they loved the Buzzcocks and that. And I was on the tour bus with Kurt, and he said, I love the vocal sound on Harmony in My Head. And I said, I smoked 20 cigarettes to get that rough sound, you know. I said, the chorus is sweet, but I want it guttural, like Little Richard. And I think I read somewhere that John Lennon smoked a lot of cigarettes to sing Twist and Shout. So I wanted that kind of... So he loved that. And I was thinking, you know, his voice ain't that dissimilar to mine on Harmony in My Head. Or, you know, it's that guttural thing on that one. And so he liked that. But he loved the Buzzcocks anyway. He thought we dressed weird because they had big cardigans and that. You know, he's got these weird little English mod clothes or something. But they were big fans, you know.
Did you see more of the influence of Buzzcocks on American bands or on UK bands? Did you sort of... Because a lot of the hardcore American bands, punk bands of the 80s sort of cite Buzzcocks, but then you also get it the same in the UK. Yeah.
I mean, we've had a lot of... I didn't realise how many bands we've inspired, really. I mean, you don't kind of set out to do that, but you know, even from REM, and I've seen U2 say like you know, was inspired by Buzzcocks. Or I'm not responsible for what happens after, but I mean, Nirvana, Pearl Jam, lots of those kind of bands, which is kind of punk at half speed, really, you know. But I think, you know, they love the sort of Britishness, and they used to call us like the punk Beatles over there in America, you know. They'd say like Shelley and Diggle in a blender, like the Beatles in a blender, something, you know, that kind of stuff. So, and they like the British music, you know, like Eddie, Pearl Jam, and all them sort of people. But there's so many bands we inspired out there. I mean, we took 2 years to go there because we're busy over here back in the day, and you got to meet so many people that, you know, so many bands that started because of like the Buzzcocks or these heard things, you know, and. But it has been the same everywhere now. But then again, we was first out of the block. We was the first school with, you know, the Clash and the Pistols, right? But I guess we did have that distinctive sound. You can hear echoes of Buzzcocks in other people's songs sometimes. But, you know, we didn't realise at the time how distinctive that sound was, maybe, you know. And you find a lot, you know.
You played with Nirvana about 10 years, over 10 years after you'd disbanded, broken up for that time. Was it different going back after you'd broken up? Did you have a different working relationship? Did you have a different touring plan, schedule, or lifestyle?
Yeah, we was inevitably, we was like different people then, you know. I mean, when it first comes, you don't really realise. We used to write those hits in an afternoon, you know. And you know, we had a quick understanding, and you're young, youthful, and you're thinking, and they'd come because we've got to be in the pub at 5 o'clock. So the next week you'd be on top of the pops with this song, but we didn't treat these songs too preciously, you know, overanalyze them and stuff. It's like that's that will do. Let's get to the pub, you know. But you kind of have an instinct to what you're doing as well. But you know, it wasn't like, oh, let's work out the first verse. There'll be people next door with their fingers in their ear going like, oh, you know, they're only just getting to the intro and we'd be out of there by then. Sorry, I forgot what we were saying after that.
When you disbanded, when you came back together and you were touring with Nirvana, let's say in '94, was it a different tour? Was it a different way of life compared to when you were younger?
That's it. Like I say, it was like that at the beginning, this quickness and excitement, and then we came back as different people because there was no mobile phones when we was putting records out in those days, and no computers even. So when we came back, we was kind of different. I did my own thing for years, and Pete didn't. That kind of comes full circle. A bit like Oasis now. They've done the solo things, and now it's time to get back for a while, you know. And that's what we did. And but then, you know, it's a different world then. So we made some different kind of albums then, you know. We had that Trace Test Transmission album. It's hard to say that sometimes. And Trace Test, and we had one called Modern, which was like a bit electronic as well, you know. And then we made that electronic one, and they're going, oh, it doesn't sound like the Buzzcocks. Like, oh, hold on, we're trying to do something different there. Mm-hmm. So there were different albums in a different time, but they've all got, you know, kind of good songs and all part of the journey, I think, you know. You've got to take each album, you know. It's good to grow with the band if you're into a band and see what they do. You can't keep going like, you know, not the same as the first album or the second one. It's like we were not trying to create that. That's already there, you know.
And when you disbanded, you go back together, did you and Pete sort of have a soulmate sort of thing, something that just kept pulling you back together? You didn't want to be away for too long?
Well, we'd done all our things, and to be honest, we never thought we'd get back, but we kind of did. I think I had a bank flag convenience for a while, and that was billed as Buzzcocks FOC in Germany and in somewhere else in France. And I'm going, we're not even doing any Buzzcocks songs. I wouldn't do Buzzcocks songs at that time. And that was a catalyst really that brought us back together because the American agent thought we were back, you know. So we said we'll get back through this 3-week tour of America because we hadn't seen each other for years, probably. I'd seen Pete actually here and there, but I'd seen the others. And from that 3-week tour, we just started carrying on around the world. Do you want to go to Australia, Japan, all that, you know? And then came back to Britain. So it was like, you know, sometimes you don't know what you've got at the time, you know. And it can get intense in a band. You know, they used to say an average band's about 5 or 6 years, you know. Because if it is intense, there's a lot of creativity and a lot of things going on, you know, you've got to deal with that. But that only lasts for so long until people, you know, the wheels start falling off the wagon, you know. Everybody has to get a break, you know. And
was that personalities or lifestyle that?
Well, it was all of it, you know. I mean, you know, one of the reasons, you know, we started going to America a lot and travelling everywhere. Well, it was full on sex, drugs and rock and roll, you know. Not many people know that about the Buzzcocks or whatever, you know. We didn't apply that as our trade. But we was like Led Zeppelin on the road sometimes, you know, the Hammer of the Gods stuff, you know. But if you don't take that when you're in your 20s and enjoy it, you know, it's it's amazing you can do all that and still get up in the morning and write those songs as well, you know. It's something. But when you're on the dole, when you're 17, you're thinking, well, if I get a break somewhere, and then that happens, you've got to embrace all that stuff, you know. And we were still creative all the way through. But then when you come back, you're a bit wiser and, like, you play a bit differently, you know. But, you know, we made some interesting albums after that, you know, and still doing it to this day, really.
And you released a book last year.
Yeah.
What spurred you to write that?
Well, just getting older, the publisher said, would you like to write a book about your life? You seem to live a long life. So it was like, okay, yeah, you know, it's about time it was a bit because people know about your musical life. Oh, you had hits or Sorry on Top of the Pops or a gig, but they kind of want to know where it comes from a bit, you know.
Sure.
It's always interesting to find out where the music comes from. And so I did that, really. Autonomy, yeah. With well, a friend of mine, Simon Goddard, he writes the books. I started to write stuff myself, and I thought, I haven't got the time. I'm on the road all the time, and I was writing this new album. And I thought, you know, it's too much, so I'll get a ghostwriter, you know, Simon. So in between the tours, I'd meet him in Highgate outside a pub. And he'd ask me the stories, I'd tell him the stories. It went on. In between 10 pints of Guinness every time. It was hard work, that book on the Guinness, you know. But that's kind of the way we did it, you know. It was kind of like a Proustian thing about he'd ask me something and I'd remember things. And then once I'm kind of wound up, it's, oh, yeah, I remember all that now. But sometimes sitting down with a blank piece of paper, especially writing about yourself, it's hard to remember what I'm, you know. It's like 50 years of memories, but where do you start? You know, so somebody asking you that. So we did it like that, and a lot of people love that book. I believe it got like #1 in like the Times and the Telegraph. For a working class kid that joined a punk band, not one bad, you know.
Yeah, is that a legacy thing of wanting to just, you know, be remembered for more, or, you know, have a bit of context to your music?
Well, people want to know, you know, where, you know, they want to know where you come from or what your life was like in Manchester before they knew you as a Buzzcock, you know. So, telling it like it is, you know, the rough streets and all that, I loved, you know. I did a weekend in jail as well, that straightened my life out. There's a lot of honesty in the book, you know. I didn't go to stage school or anything. I mean, there was street gangs and wars and, you know, you was told you'd get nowhere. But I ended up doing this and my other mate ended up with brain surgeon, you know. But nobody in the street was supposed to do anything. You're supposed to get married and, you know, by the time you're 18 and, you know, be down at a local factory, you know. Which, that was the only job I had. I did work in like a little steel mill for a couple of months to get money to get a guitar and stuff. And of course, the strike there, you know. So that was when I was 17, so punk rock roots were coming out then, you know. But at the same time, I was reading a lot of books, a lot of philosophy, and all the literature and all that, loads of books. I thought if they come for me from Oxford and Cambridge, I'll f***ing have them. That was the only self-defence of a working class kid, and then of course she was armed with a guitar, which was your weapon, and you had the words and stuff, So hopefully the reason for writing a book is that kind of inspiration, Going to stage school and saying I plugged into a computer and it gave me a hit ain't really a life story,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But the trials and tribulations of being in gangs in Manchester or having to, preserve yourself in these situations. But also that adversity gives you a lot of inspiration as well. A lot of sensitivity and a lot of beauty, I mean, I started to realise, you start reading poetry in the library on the dole and stuff. I was looking for the poetry of life, in the midst of a industrial heavy background, I mean, it was... but I kind of loved it all, like Coronation Street thing. At that time, it was kind of cool because, it was like people knew each other and all that. There was,
Mm-hmm.
Nobody was getting stabbed every week. You might get a punch here and there, but you would get, it wasn't heavy like that. There was a lot of communication. And, but you weren't supposed to believe in that situation, or nobody thought you could do that, even myself, but through rock and roll, it gave you more insight into things. And I think that was it with Buzzcocks, just to inspire people of, like, the possibilities, Mm-hmm. You don't have to have anything, to create or use your imagination. That's what it was for me.
Well, we've said your stories and your influences. Is that what you're most proud of? Is just inspiring or sort of encouraging someone from maybe a work class background
so,
to pick up a guitar?
Because I never thought I'd get out of that situation. I didn't want that first half. It growing up was fine with it, but the second half, I thought, I don't want to live in a cul-de-sac on a rainy Sunday afternoon with a load of regular people, That was a weird thing at the time, even though they're probably all right. But that inspiration of the I mean, even today, lived in London for years, walking around on a summer's day, just walking around, looking at people, it's still the greatest place, Mm-hmm. I've got a house in Greece, I've got a house in London, I've got things, but it ain't as good as just walking around the street in the summer in London or in any town, That's really all you need in the end,
Mm-hmm. Freedom.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. That's what I want. That's really why I got in a band as well, was the freedom,
Mm-hmm.
That was another key thing.
And you've had it.
Well, I was I realised at school that when they said, what do you want to do? I said, I'm a conscientious object at work. I won't be looking for a job, So if you get 6 O-levels, you can get in a bank. I said, I don't want to do it.
Well, Steve, thank you very much for joining me today. All the best.
You're welcome. Thank you.